All right, what's up, guys? This is a pretty unscripted video, but it's something I've wanted to talk about for a while. But it's basically just going over the kind of different builds of Kano at the moment, and also just to kind of be a little bit of update on how things are changing since the high seas meta. But basically, I have this spreadsheet here, and in this spreadsheet, I basically have four different versions of Kano. Now, again, this isn't every version, and there are still some people running things slightly different. Some people will have like cindering in the main board and stuff like that. But essentially, at least in the purple Discord, these are kind of the quote unquote builds we agree on at Kano at this point. So I just kind of wanted to summarize them all in one place and give people, the chance to kind of look at all the differences within a card and or within the cards between each deck and kind of go over like a high level summary of each of the decks. So in this spreadsheet, we kind of have this deck summary here. So these are the four decks I'm going to be talking about. And then we have links to my versions of the deck and then the kind of standard deck link, which most people will link to in the Discord. Mine is going to be slightly different, maybe like a card or two, but functionally they're going to be largely the same here. Going on in the video, I'm going to be referring to my versions of the deck. But again, the best starter point is probably, the deck limit. So shout out to Blazing and Cat Pair, who have done a lot of work on this, and just everyone else in purple, who've like helped build these decks over time. So kind of just a real quick summary. Let's go over the four different versions of the deck. So first is Unga Bunga, as we lovingly call it. So let me pull this up. Mono Moon. Sorry, being rough right now. Here we go. Okay. So this is Unga Bunga. So this is basically the same list that we've been on for I don't know how long at this point since Rosetta came out. The distinguishing factor of Unga Bunga really is we were going to have a blue count of 36, and we're going to have spindles in the sideboard, and then 9 open the floodgates. Those are really the main identifiers there. The main changes since Ruby Amulet, or since High Seas came out, is the addition of Ruby Amulet and Sapphire Amulet, taking out 2 Clarity Potions. And then we also have Old Knocker coming in. It's just pretty much a pure upgrade over Spellfire Cloak. So the idea of this deck is we're really just trying to kill someone in one combo. Now, this is very similar to the ICBM deck list, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But the basic idea here is we want to set out 2 to 3 potions, and we want to basically from there kill people by sending a wildfire and then having extenders in the middle, open the floodgates, and then sonic boom, stuff like that to give us, 3 or 4 spells deep, and then, finish with the blazing, to kill people basically in one turn, 40 and up. The main difference between this and ICBM is spindle versus overflows, which I'll talk about in a second, but just high level, that's what this deck is doing. So next up is ICBM, which is functionally very similar to how it plays. And we'll go over the kind of differences later, but the main difference between this deck and the other is overflow the Aether Wells instead of Aether Spindles. So you can see here, basically, I have 3 yellow overflows and 2 red overflows. And this is basically from the difference between this and the Unga Bunga list is I'm taking out 3 Aether Spindles, and essentially 2 random blues. So you can kind of move your blue count here depending on what you think is best. So they can run anywhere from 33 to 36 blues. If you're on 33, you're running 3 red overflows. If you're on 36 blues, you're running 0 red overflows. The main difference functionally between this deck and Unga Bunga is that we want to fire faster. It's essentially a even more aggressive of the Unga Bunga deck. So, we don't have Aether Spindle, which is good for finding pots and kind of a play on our turn to either strip a card from hand or, like I said, set up the next turn. We're really just trying to play 2 to 3 potions and then blind flip into a win. It's similar to what we're doing in Unga, but in theory, Spindle is not the best blind flip and combo, so you have to be a little more wary. This deck is just a slightly more aggressive version of this. So in theory, this deck was better in the Aurora meta because we really had to deal with Aurora quickly. With Aurora gone, it's kind of not as big a deal, but essentially, if you think you have a very heavy aggro meta, I would say this is probably the optimal deck to run. But again, Spindle might have a little more game now, considering the fact that we've added, Ruby and Sapphire Amulet, so there's more potions to find. So those are kind of the two, and these are basically the two, like, if you had a tournament tomorrow, what most people would recommend you bring. So the next two are Tempo and Mono Moon, and these basically play on a slightly different spectrum than the other deck. So let's start out with Tempo. This is a deck, honestly, I'm not very good at. I need to get more practice on, but the basic idea of Tempo is that we're playing for more mini combos and on our turn versus just trying to kill someone for 40. So basically, what this one does is it really tests your opponent Kano knowledge. Basically, they have to respect the plays on your turns that they may not know of. So, for example, you may send an Aether Flare for 4. They just don't AB it, and next thing you know, they're dead. You could go Aether Flare into Lessons, or into Aether Flare into Snapback into Lessons into Blazing on your turn, Pop Striders, whatever, they're dead. Or you could just do a 20, 30 damage combo on your turn, and from there we can knock them out further. So there's a lot of play patterns like that. You run cards like Course of the Amphitheater to give you buffs on your turn. You give you Snapback to kind of have you extenders on your turn. Same with Chain Lightning and Reverberate. Just the ability to kind of play more cards on our turn without being 100% reluctant on Wildfire. So again, if you're not really trying to kill people, well, you're just trying to kill people in a different way, and you're not really looking for as huge a combo as Unga Bunga is. And again, this deck, I'm not sure honestly what what versions this deck is better into. It's kind of, I think it would be the last version of these I recommend. It's really good to learn the fundamentals of Kano and have fun playing with a different play style. But overall, like in the current meta, this is a version I wouldn't strongly recommend. So then the last one is Mono Moon. And basically why we call it Mono Moon is we don't have Crucible of Aether. We just have Waning Moon in the sideboard. And then what this is basically an extension of the big spell sideboard that exists in, like, if we look at ICBM, you basically have the sideboard that's filled with 1-for-4s, which are basically red spells that cost 1 and deal 4 damage, and then 2-for-5s as well, which are red spells that cost 2 and do 5 damage. But basically the idea is this into slow heroes is a lot better because we can just chip them down over the game. So if someone wants to sit on like Oasis or something like that, we can just keep sending chip damage to them and get them below 20 health, and then we can have a combo that's not nearly as big. So the basic idea of this is you want to be blocking with you basically want to be playing 2 card hands. So like if you have an Aether Quickening and 3 blues, you want to block with 2 blues. On your turn, play the Aether Quickening and activating the Waning Moon. That's either going to strip cards from hand, which will give you longer in the game to set up as many potions as you want, or you're going to chip them down to, I've gotten Guardians down to like 12 before, right? And then you can combo from there, and even if they have Oasis or, more hate, you can kind of get over it. So this is really good into slower decks. So, Guardian, Earth, I think this has a lot of game into. I think it's pretty good into the mirror. Essentially any deck where you would or any deck you would sideboard into big spell, this is going to have game into. If you have a really aggressive meta, it's still probably not optimal. Like I said, I don't think this is really the optimal deck list, but I think it's probably better than Tempo in my opinion. It has more game into some of the meta decks. But yeah, so these are the deck lists, just like high level overview. So if you look on this tab here, I have kind of a breakdown of, the quote unquote gameplay styles. Then I have a link to my deck list, and then, the standard deck list that, people kind of reference. And then really just the identifiers here. So again, Unga Bunga, 36 blues, and we're at Aether Spindle. ICBM is 6 to 9 overflows, and then 36 to 33 blues. A big spell or a Mono Moon is a bunch of those 1-for-4s and 2-for-5s in the main board plus Mono Moon, or so basically just Waning Moon. And then Paradiso Tempo, you're looking for stuff like Red Aether Flare and Snapback. So that's kind of just high level. One thing that I was interested to look at was really kind of the overlap of cards in here. So basically, over here, I just have every card name and the color, and then I have some kind of simplifications here. So functionally, how we look at a Scalding Rain, a Scalding Rain and a Eternal Inferno, they're the same thing. They're 1-for-4. So basically, I just kind of have these kind of higher level summaries to break it down here. And then I just wanted to see, what stuff is quote unquote really core, as I call it, for each deck. So this is just looking in the main board. But if we look here, what is the cards that are shared between every deck? And I think this is a kind of good lesson to learn, if you want to build your own Kano deck, or if you want to take a Kano deck and kind of alter it slightly. So we can see here, basically, there's essentially, 12 core cards. So let me zoom in a little bit, but essentially we have Aether Wildfire. I would call this core. Blazing Aether, core. Kindle. Mono Moon runs 2 Kindle, but it has sideboards another Kindle, so I would still call this core. Lessons in Lava, core. Blue Aether Flare. Energy Potions, Eye, Gaze, Overflow, Potion of Deja Vu, Ruby Amulet, Will of Arcana. So it's basically, potions, and then, the standard cards, that everyone knows you should run in Kano. So this is more of just a lesson that, you know, if you do want to start with your own Kano deck, you pretty much should probably include these cards, unless there's like a budget restriction where you can't afford you know, stuff like that. But these are the cards that, you know, pretty much everyone agrees you should run, you know. And if we simplify that more, you know, to the right, we can kind of see, you know, the similarities between each deck and how they differ, right? So if we look here at just like 1 for 4s and 2 for 5s, for example, you know, you can see basically, you know, Mono Moon and Tempo, they both run blues, which are a little interesting. These decks, you know, the Unga Bunga decks, they really prefer to run Zaps, which are 0 for 1s, just because they're better blind flips on combo. Because if you don't have the extra resource to pay for it, it's not great. But Mono Moon, you know, sometimes we just want to get the chip damage in, so it's better to have those. So you can see, you know, the slight differences here. If we look at, well, sorry, let's go between the simplification. I even have a deeper thing, which is basically like things like extender, tempo, etc. So if you look at extenders here, we can basically see, you know, Unga Bunga's on 15, ICBM's on 20, Tempo's on 6, and then Mono Moon's on 9. So we just have a lot more extenders and, you know, kind of workarounds from the combo here. So nothing too in depth here. Feel free to leave any comments. I'll link, or not I'll link, but you know, well, yeah, I'll link the Purple Discord. We have the Kano chat over there. It's very helpful. But I just thought this would be a kind of good resource for people to use and reference, you know, as far as seeing what the different versions of the decks are and, you know, the commonalities between them all.